All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring what I like to call the absolute ultimate internet hypothetical for us as American consumers. You know, we all know the internet is basically the lifeblood of modern society, right? It drives everything, from our economy down to our personal relationships. But the way we actually get it into our homes, well, that is on the brink of a massive paradigm shift. Over the next few minutes, we're going to look closely at the data and put Starlink head-to-head with the traditional American infrastructure.
So what if America just completely abandoned traditional ISPs overnight? I mean, really, imagine firing your cable company today, just literally pulling the plug, escaping those relentlessly frustrating customer service calls, the confusing promo rates, and those scheduled technician visits between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. where they somehow still show up the next day. Imagine relying entirely on space for your connection. It's a wildly fascinating thought experiment. And if we apply the available data to this scenario, it reveals some truly massive implications for how we live and work. Section 1. America's current internet grid. You know, we often take this massive, invisible, physical network totally for granted. Right now, the US relies heavily on hundreds of thousands of miles of completely static infrastructure. We're talking underground fiber optic cables, aging copper wiring, and endless cable lines just strung up on poles right outside your window. And laying this physical cable in the dirt, it is incredibly expensive. We're talking anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000 per mile. Because it's so capital intensive, this system has historically birthed these entrenched regional monopolies. You know the drill. You might only have one real choice for high-speed access in your neighborhood. And with monopolies, well, out come those hidden fees that push average internet bills higher and higher every single year. Plus, that enormous cost per mile creates massive dead zones in rural areas, literally leaving over 40 million Americans without reliable access to high-speed broadband.
Section 2. The sky versus the ground.
Now, a service like Starlink is completely different from that old-school, super sluggish satellite tech you might be picturing. The magic term here is low Earth orbit, or LEO. This is an Earth-centered orbit very, very close to the planet. See, instead of one massive satellite sitting tens of thousands of miles away in a geostationary orbit, which, by the way, causes huge delays or ping, often exceeding 600 milliseconds, making online gaming or video calls basically impossible. LEO uses a whole constellation of much smaller satellites. These things are just a few hundred miles up, and that drops the latency down to a blistering 20 to 40 milliseconds. It fundamentally rewrites the rules of space-based internet.
So comparing these two infrastructures side by side reveals a pretty stark contrast. With traditional infrastructure, it's underground, it's totally static, and it relies on millions of miles of physical wires. I mean, once a wire gets cut by a rogue backhoe, your service is out until a truck actually rolls in to fix it. But Starlink? It operates in low Earth orbit, it's incredibly dynamic, and get this, it uses actual lasers in space to communicate between satellites at the speed of light. And here's a mind-bending physics fact for you. Light actually travels through the vacuum of space roughly 47% faster than it does through the solid glass of a fiber optic cable. That means data moving between distant points, like, say, London to New York, can theoretically travel faster via Starlink space lasers than through transatlantic underground cables. It's literally static, earthly wires versus thousands of moving satellites zooming overhead.
Section 3. Can Starlink handle America?
330 million. That's roughly the population of the United States. So what actually happens if all 330 million Americans log onto the Starlink network at the exact same time? Seriously, if everyone abandoned their traditional ISP today, fired up a dish and tried to stream 4K movies on Netflix, download those massive 100-gigabyte Call of Duty updates, and jump onto concurrent HD video calls, would the sky hold up, or would the whole system just come crashing down? Let's break down the mechanics of this great switch. Taking this step by step from day one, here's what the great switch would actually look like for us. First off, every single household would have to completely disconnect from the traditional grid. Second, you'd have to physically install the satellite dish somewhere with a 100% clear, completely unobstructed view of the sky. Just pause and think about the sheer logistical nightmare of that footprint. Where do 330 million dishes even go? How do high-rise apartments in New York City manage hundreds of individual dishes crammed onto a single roof, all fighting for a clear line of sight past neighboring skyscrapers? It's crazy. And third, once it's installed, you'd be relying entirely on constant satellite handoffs. Because these satellites move incredibly fast across the sky, your dish has to seamlessly switch its connection from one satellite to the next every few minutes.
Imagine 330 million people constantly catching satellite signals, like a giant, invisible, highly coordinated game of hot potato.
But here is the hard pause. Physics kind of dictate that an immediate, total transition would hit a massive brick wall. For starters, we'd instantly face massive network congestion. See, satellite internet is divided into cells, roughly 15-mile hex grids down here in the ground, and a single satellite can only beam down a finite amount of capacity to each cell. So if millions of people in densely populated areas like LA are crammed into the same cell, all fighting for just a few gigabits of total throughput, those promised high speeds would instantly drop back to frustrating dial-up levels. Furthermore, there are strict hardware supply limits. You literally cannot manufacture and ship hundreds of millions of highly complex phased array satellite dishes overnight. And lastly, routine weather interference. Heavy rain, dense clouds, snow, they can physically degrade a satellite signal. You generally don't get weather outages with an underground fiber optic cable buried 3 feet in the dirt, right?
Section 4. The future of U.S. Internet.
So the reality of this switch is a delicate balancing act. Looking at the facts impartially, this what-if scenario lands squarely between a utopian dream of escaping earthly monopolies and the technical nightmare of overtaxed celestial bandwidth. Think of fiber optics like massive, high-capacity freight trains. They are absolutely unparalleled for moving huge amounts of data efficiently between major, densely populated hubs. Starlink, on the other hand, is like a fleet of high-tech helicopters. They're perfect for dropping exactly what you need into hard-to-reach, isolated places where tracks just can't go. But they're pretty terrible for everyday mass transit. Starlink is a phenomenal, disruptive lifeline for bridging the rural divide, but completely replacing the massive underground fiber networks in our major cities? The strict physics of radio frequencies and orbital mechanics say we just aren't there yet.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. Will your next internet connection come from the static ground beneath your feet, controlled by a local monopoly, or from the dynamic stars above, controlled by a private space company? The answer might not be a simple either-or situation, but rather a really fascinating complementary hybrid of both, depending entirely on your zip code. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the complex systems around you, and as always, keep exploring.